Hi, church. I hope you are doing well. I want to introduce you to a new video series I'm doing to help us revisit the Belgic Confession. The Belgic Confession is one of the Christian Reformed Church's three forms of unity. It's one of our primary confessions that talks about how we understand who God is as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and how that God is working in our world today. It's our theology summed up in about 37 articles, from Article 1, the only God, to Article 37, the last judgment, and everything in between. The Belgic Confession was written in the 1500s, and it's different from the Heidelberg Catechism because the Catechism is primarily about training a person in the basics of the faith. You have the first portion of the Heidelberg Catechism that's about guilt and misery. Why am I a sinner? And why does that matter? The second portion is about grace and redemption. What has Jesus done to save me from my sins? And the third portion, gratitude or thanksgiving, is all about how I should live in light of what Jesus has done for me. And so the Belgic Confession is more of a deep dive into theology, getting into the nitty gritty. Like, what does it mean for someone to be justified by faith? Or what are the marks of the true church? Or tell me more about the sacrament of baptism or the Lord's Supper. The Belgic Confession gets into the nitty gritty of theology. And so throughout this video series, I'm going to take time to read through the Belgic Confession. Don't worry, not all at once, just one article at a time, and highlight some important features of each article. Today, we're going to start with Article 1, the only God. It reads, "We all believe in our hearts and confess with our mouths that there is a single and simple spiritual being whom we call God, eternal, incomprehensible, invisible, unchangeable, infinite, almighty, completely wise, just, and good, and the overflowing source of all good." This is the first article of the Belgic Confession. I want to highlight a couple things from this article. The first is that line where it says, "We all believe in our hearts and confess with our mouths that there is a single and simple spiritual being whom we call God." First, God is single. We believe in one God, not many gods. We believe in a God that is separate from this world. He's not the same as creation. He's separate from creation. We believe in a God that's real, that's out there, not in the God of our imagination, but in the God that's revealed to us through the scriptures and through creation. But we also believe in a simple spiritual being. And what does simple mean in this context of theology? Well, it doesn't mean simplistic. It doesn't mean easy to understand. It doesn't mean that we can know more about God than God knows about himself. What simple means here is that God is not made up of parts. Think about your own body. You have hands, arms, legs, torso, a head. If one of those are taken away, you are still you. If I got my right hand somehow tragically chopped off, I would still be Travis. Sure, I'd be one hand short, but I would still be Travis. But with God, every one of his attributes are the essence of who he is. So if you were to get rid of his justice, he would no longer be God. If you were to somehow get rid of his goodness, he would no longer be God. And so it's important for us to see him as he really is, that in his essence, he is who he is. And he is the great I am. And so that means we should not put a hierarchy on God's attributes, right? Something we commonly say is something like, yeah, I know that God can be judgmental. I know that he's shown wrath, but above all, he's loving. That's just simply not true. God is loving, but he's also wrathful. God is also a judge. God is also good. God is also just. God is also wise. And if you take any one of those away or minimize one and lift up another, then you are misrepresenting who God is. And so this first article in the Belgic Confession reminds us that God is a single and simple spiritual being. But I want to highlight the last portion of this article as well. That God is the overflowing source of all good. This is a classic Reformed way of thinking. That when we see something that is good or beautiful or true in the world, we give God the glory because we know that good, true, and beautiful thing or person or reality comes from the ultimate source of what is good, true, and beautiful. And that is God. That's the God we serve. And so we come to theology with a curiosity to know God deeper. And by knowing God deeper, we will actually begin to worship him even more. That the very act of trying to think God's thoughts after him, as Herman Bavinck, the Dutch theologian, would put it, or to say God's words after he has said it, is an act of worship. It's an act of imitation of God. In the book of Ephesians, Paul encourages his church there in Ephesus to imitate God. Or in Acts, where it says the Christians were first called Christians in Athens. And they were called Christians, which means little Christs. They were to be imitators of Christ, showing who he is. And so I encourage you, join me on this journey, revisiting the Belgic Confession. Let's dive into it. Get to know what our tradition says about who God is and what he's up to in the world. And pray that the Lord would use this process to draw us closer to him and to bring him worship in every aspect of our lives. So thanks for joining me for this first episode, and we'll see you next time.